School Directors is hereby called to order. Will you please rise and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic which stands one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
The next item of business is request to address the board. I have two, Roby Kettner of Cedar Valley, about 7 generations.
Good evening. My child attends 7th Gen Middle School, and I'm here to show appreciation for the teachers and their unsurpassed curriculum. My child is thriving, and I have the following concerns: student safety, administration engagement in the school community, accountability and oversight of administration in the school's daily operations, and a desire of cohesive compliance in the charter school law regarding instructional support for the school students. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, John Dodges of the Mass.
Hello, board members. Thank you again. Just a couple points on the upcoming Act 93 admin pay raises that are probably going to be coming up soon. And I would just ask that, again, you pay attention to that, because you have 100% control of how that affects the PCERs and everything, benefits that go along with it. And we need some money for the children. We can't have everything going all the time to the teachers and admin. I was just looking over the PCERs retirement stuff, and I see that the top 10 retirees from East Penn make the top 1% list of all PCERs payouts. That includes Penn State, Temple, PSBA, everything. Top guys making $8,000 a month, down to Seal Birdsell, who used to be our board secretary, who's making $6,700 and something a month. And then you have to add Social Security onto that. So that bumps it up to maybe $9,000. That isn't too bad. But there's a lot of people that aren't making anything near that. And again, whenever you give a raise, that adds directly to that extra cost. And as you know, this is probably $45 or more billion underfunded, just PCERs. So every time you make a vote like this, that makes it that much worse. And I'd like to ask maybe one of the board members, if you ask sometime, how much effect does this have on the cost of everything when you do these raises? Especially the PCERs, benefits, how much payout is this extra? And as Mr. Munson said the last time, we cut an awful lot of things out from the children, which, you know, we cut them, but we keep giving these raises to everybody. And they're very good raises. I mean, I understand and everything, but, you know, $8,000 a month, $7,000, $6,500, there's an awful lot of them. So, and then the foundation thing, I have questions on that too. I know people that were involved with the foundation up in Parkland. And it sounds good and everything again, but again, a lot of that money went towards the teachers, programs for their schooling or whatever. Not much went to the kids. I hope that this is driven so that anything that's coming from that foundation is driven by the students and the children of the school district, not by the teachers and everything. They get enough, and that's what taxes are for. If you need that to make up that difference, again, Mr. Munson mentioned about the field trips. They were cut out. And you're sending notes home for other people to, you know, help pay out for the kids that can't get it. That'd be perfect probably for this foundation stuff. Again, don't worry about the teachers. They get enough. Think of the kids for once. And please use your microphones. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson. I have no other requests to address the board, so I'll entertain a motion on the approval of minutes.
So moved. Second.
Any discussion on the motion? All in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Next, we have some presentations, Dr. Schiller.
Yes, thank you. Our first presentation tonight is student recognition. We have 8 students from Akunji who are being recognized for a math-a-thon. And I would like to ask Jen Thomas, 4th grade teacher at Akunji, if she would like to come forward and make an introduction on this.
Good evening, members of the East Penn School Board, Dr. Schilter, and members of the East Penn School District community. My name is Jennifer Thomas, and I'm a 4th grade teacher at Akunji Elementary School. My students and I are here tonight to tell you a little bit about the St. Jude's Math-a-thon. The students that will be speaking and holding signs were the top donators for this fundraiser. The students that will be telling you about it are Kira Norton, Astrid Linkton-Wollner, TJ Sislov, and Laura Stack. The students that are holding the signs are Nadia Crispin, Corinne Wolf, Anna Yoakum, and Julia Brown. So please give your attention to the students as they tell you more about the math-a-thon.
Thank you, Mrs. Thomas. We are here to tell you a little bit about St. Jude's Children's Research Hospital, which is located in Memphis, Tennessee. St. Jude's was founded by Danny Thomas, and approximately 6,000 patients visit the hospital each year. They treat about 260 patients per day. Children go to St. Jude's because they have diseases such as cancer, sickle cell, and genetic disorders. The researchers and doctors are constantly looking for cures for the diseases that were mentioned. In order for them to continue their research, they need donations. It takes about $1.9 million a day to run the hospital.
So, in order to help St. Jude's, the 4th graders participated in the St. Jude's Math-a-thon to raise money to help the researchers and help patients. This year we raised, drumroll please, $1,780.
Over the past 9 years, we have raised $24,329. The money we raised this year will pay for one ultrasound study or 1 day of chemotherapy. So thank you for listening to our presentation.
Thank you very much, students and Mrs. Thomas, for that presentation and your efforts. I've commented before on the tremendous giving spirit that I've seen in this school district, particularly at the secondary level. Clearly, that extends down to our elementary schools as well. And we should all be very pleased and very thankful for that and for your efforts. Thanks again. Our next presentation is on Emmaus High School Summer School Program. We'd like to give the board and the public an update. And Kristen Campbell, are you kicking it off? And so Kristen Campbell is with us, Laura Whitman, and David Barone.
Okay, just before you get started, we very much appreciate the children and their families being here. We love the work that you've done. You're certainly welcome to stay as long as you like, but if you'd like to get home, this is a great time for you to slip out. All right.
Steve and I were saying they're a tough act to follow, so thank you. Last year, it was right around this time, our administrative team presented to the board a plan for implementing a hybrid summer school program at Emmaus High School. And in particular, that plan included that many of the courses that had previously been taught in summer school via what we refer to as a traditional face-to-face model were actually delivered via online instruction that was partnered with a scheduled lab time in which students still met weekly with a high school teacher. And so this evening, Ms. Laura Whitman, who's our supervisor of secondary curriculum, and Mr. Dave Pipperato, who's the principal of Emmaus High School, will again provide the board with an update of our hybrid summer school program that Emmaus High School will offer this summer 2016. Mr. Pipperato will begin by briefly reviewing the rationale for the hybrid model, and then Ms. Whitman will transition into highlights of the program changes that we have planned for this summer 2016. So I'll turn things over to Mr. Pipperato.
Thank you, Mrs. Campbell. So our objective this evening is to accomplish three things. First, as Mrs. Campbell indicated, we do want to review with you the changes that we proposed last year at this time and then implemented in summer school. We'd like to share with you what we've learned along the way in implementing those changes, and then finally propose a few minor tweaks or some changes to the program moving forward. And so the first slide, which you have in front of you, is a review from last year on why we made the change. If you remember, we talked about with the face-to-face model or bricks and mortar, students reporting to summer school every day for 5 weeks. One of the first concerns was the attendance of students, and the 5 weeks of students being there every day for the hours that were necessary did indeed limit some students from participating. Because this represented 5 out of their 9 to 10 week summer, there were many students who wanted to take advantage of summer school but couldn't because they had to be there in school during those 5 weeks. One of the other concerns was whether or not we were truly determining mastery through the summer school model. Certainly the remediation grade did reflect the attendance, students being there, the seat time, and the task and project completion, but whether or not we were actually getting to what standards were being covered in the course and which standards were being mastered by each individual student was a concern for us. Also, there were some scheduling conflicts that always come up whenever you're trying to build a schedule with students in the building. And many times we ran into having to run several of the same courses even though the numbers didn't justify it. So in order to meet the needs of all students, we may have had to run 2 social studies courses with only 4 or 5 students in each course because they needed to take another course opposite that. And finally, we had staffing concerns or issues because in the 9 years I've been here, we've had difficulty finding teachers to teach summer school, specifically in the areas of both math and science. And so we proposed the new model last year, which provided us a number of advantages. The first one, of course, was a lot more flexibility regarding attendance, because those students who were in the hybrid or the cyber model were able to complete their work when they were able to at their convenience, whether it was at home or at school, and they didn't necessarily have to put in the same amount of seat time. Also, the new model provided us an opportunity to take a look at this new provider for our cyber school program that ran during the year. Probably most importantly was the third bullet, and that is the ability that it provided us to truly pre-assess what students had already mastered in the course, and then differentiate instruction and target to students' individual gaps in learning. So instead of following a one-size-fits-all model for students who were in a summer school class, the hybrid model allowed us to look at what they learned during the course of the year, where were the gaps, and then target those gaps. Obviously, there were fewer scheduling issues because students were taking the classes at the time that was convenient for them. And we reduced the staffing issues because we needed far fewer teachers to be here at the school. It also offered us the potential for greater credit recovery because, again, by targeting students' gaps and the areas that they needed, the areas in which they needed remediation, we were able to be more successful in them actually recovering credit. We were also able to provide students an opportunity to remediate for keystones in the summer instead of during the school year, especially those students, for example, LCTI students who don't really have time in their schedule for keystone remediation. And we were able to also offer them to retest for keystones in the summer. And so that was an advantage. So what did the hybrid model look like last year? Well, we did have a handful of courses that we still ran as what we called experiential or brick and mortar courses, and they were health, driver ed, wellness, fitness, and aquatics. In addition to those courses, everything else was done as a cyber model. The hybrid model did require students to spend time in the learning lab at school. As indicated, we certainly had differentiated levels of support based on the students' individual progress, so we were able to pre-assess students, determine their needs, address their specific needs. The lab was staffed Monday through Thursday, 9 through 12, with an English language arts teacher, a math teacher, and a special education teacher, and they were the times that students were required to be in attendance over the course of the week, not the entire time. And as you see from the next bullet, they only needed to be there 3 hours per week per course. So that's what provided them the additional flexibility. That leads to the next bullet, increased flexibility. Certainly in terms of rigor, we did hear from students that there was much more rigor in the course, and students found the courses to be challenging. We were able to determine their mastery because, again, the pre-assessment let us know what they already knew. We were able to determine the gaps, and then the post-assessment allowed us to determine whether or not they mastered the curriculum from start to finish. And of course, we were able to customize and differentiate through using the coursework. And as you'll see later in one of our slides, it also decreased the likelihood of deficit spending. I'm going to turn this over to Gloria now to review a few more things with you.
Good evening. So what did we learn from the shift last year? We definitely saw that more students were interested in this flexible model. As you can see, we had 170 courses offered in our face-to-face bricks and mortar. And then last year, 250 courses were offered as part of that hybrid. One of the things we learned is that the tech support by the cyber provider matters very much. That was something that we encountered as a challenge, and is part of the reason why we are making a move to a different vendor this summer. You can see that 26 students opted to retake the Keystone. We did not mandate retake of the Keystone, so we asked students to volunteer some of their summer time to do that retest. 50% of them moved to proficient after the 5-week remediation. And we also found that more time is needed for true acceleration. So if we're awarding credit for a course like Algebra 1, Algebra 2, or Geometry, the 5 weeks time was pushing it, and we did allow extensions for students, and we looked to that this summer in terms of possibly up to 8 weeks for a true acceleration to happen. So the vendor change we're proposing is to eLearn 21, and eLearn 21 is out of our local IU. So it is IU supported, technically speaking, and it gives us some local control. The IU integrates with our reporting system, so currently we use eSchool, and the eSchool will talk to Genius and the management system that's part of the vendors. There's also on-demand tutoring as part of the online teaching model. So that would be available to students again from 8 in the morning until 11 p.m. at night during our summer school. There are multiple course vendors that were vetted through this consortium that I'm about to speak to. So basically the Capital IU 8 years ago started a consortium for, again, just internally in their IU, and it's grown considerably in the last 8 years. Locally, other districts using this consortium are Southern Lehigh, Salisbury, Lehighton, and Northern Lehigh. But statewide, we have 7 IUs that are using it, and there's now 90 or more school districts currently using it going into the summer. So there are some, we would be in addition as to, I believe, another 9 school districts. One of the other big things, and we've heard this repeatedly in student feedback forums, is the need for online driver education. This is not to be confused with the on-the-road training, but the online driver education is vetted through the DMV and PDE. And so this vendor is able to offer us a PA-approved online driver education course. And then, of course, we do have a cost savings that will be available to our students. So up here is what you see are the vendor fees for the coursework itself. And these are the eLearn 21 fees. So for credit recovery, an Edison course is $130 approximately. An Accelerate Ed, which will cover some of our more, like singleton electives, like oceanography, would be approximately $144 in coursework. And we do have students who need those science credits in order to graduate. The acceleration courses, there are 2 up there that you see through Edison, and one I'd like to distinguish is the NCAA approved, the $520 credit. That is necessary if a student wants to use the online credit as part of the clearinghouse. So if they're looking to participate in Division I or Division II athletics and need the NCAA approval, the course cannot be modified in any way. There could be no diagnostic, there could be no, they can't condense the course in any manner or alter it. And so the course itself is put through to the NCAA to be approved by that vendor and must remain untouched and gone through sequentially. The diagnostic adapted is for students who just want to accelerate purely to move on and knock out the prerequisite to the next course. For instance, if they wanted to accelerate Algebra 2 so they could move on to geometry, the diagnostic adapted would be an appropriate choice in that respect, knowing that the student would still acquire the math credits necessary for graduation in NCAA. The health course that's featured there is a new addition, and again, that's an online full acceleration health course. And then you see the cost for the driver education at $118.
Finally, I'm going to do my best to walk you through this slide. I kind of wish there were some 4th graders still here to help me with this. There are a lot of moving parts, so I will do my best to try to explain how we determined, or compared, I should say, the costs from one year to the next. So if you look at the first column that is entitled Summer 2014, you can see that prior to last summer, we're referring to the face-to-face model, or all students reporting to the high school, teachers being hired, using our course content or our curriculum. And so there was no charge at that time for course content or coursework, and the majority of the money went towards teacher salaries. You can see that the total monies collected that particular year, and then the difference between the two. And so there was a deficit that first year, or not first year, that year prior, of $1,349.25. And in the bottom block, you can see what we were charging students at that time for the course. So CR meaning credit recovery, and acceleration meaning acceleration. If you move to the middle column, this was last year. We had a hodgepodge of students. So if you look under where it says Summer 2015 Hybrid Model, 146 students took credit recovery as part of the cyber program. 27 students took acceleration as part of the cyber program. 14 students reported here to EHS as part of the face-to-face model for credit recovery, and 63 reported here every day for acceleration. That was mostly due to health, driver's ed, aquatics, thank you, aquatics. And so if you drop down to the next box, you can see the total that was charged to us by the vendor at that time was $29,525 for the coursework. In actuality, and Laura can speak to this a bit, there were some issues that arose during the course of the summer with the services they provided us, and so by the end of the summer they reduced their rate by about $10,000, and so the actual cost to us was $19,525. Before that discount, it would have been $29,000. The salaries, and this was for the teachers who were teaching both the bricks and mortar and the teachers who were teaching in learning labs, was $23,500. Total monies collected, and this $48,000 does reflect first student discounts. And what I mean by that is there are students who do qualify for a reduced rate through free and reduced lunch programs. And so we deduct that amount out. And it also reflects the refunds that they were provided by the company. So those refunds went directly to the student. So when it was all said and done, the total monies collected was $48,000, and that provided a difference in the positive of $5,000. And you can see at the bottom block what we were charging students last year for the credit recovery if they were here on site, the cyber credit recovery, and the acceleration. And then finally, the last column is if we assume the same exact number of students for this coming year, so we compare apples to apples. The numbers will change slightly because we are able to provide health and driver ed. And so 153 of those students would have been in credit recovery through the cyber program, which included health and driver ed. 55 would have been in acceleration. Only 7 would have been here for credit recovery in bricks and mortar, and only 34 would have been here for acceleration in bricks and mortar. Looking at those numbers and the previous slide that Laura went through with you in terms of what those courses cost us, that would be a total coursework cost of $35,565. Because there are actual fewer teachers needed by picking up health and driver ed, we actually have an actual projected cost, if the number stayed the same in terms of students, of course, of $11,721. We were building in a few extra dollars there because what we did discover last year was there were a number of students who needed to go beyond 5 weeks in order to completely master the content. And so we did have teachers who had to stay on. And also we're contemplating whether or not we want to put a biology teacher on this year in addition. And so we're projecting out to around a $16,000 cost for salary. Total monies collected then, and again, this would also reflect the student discounts for those students who are on free and reduced lunch, would be roughly it would be $56,350, assuming the same numbers. And so the difference again would be in the positive of $4,785. And the cost to students really don't differ much except for now offering the NCAA acceleration. That course will cost us $520, and we felt that we would only charge students $520 because we were hitting that, in our opinion, hitting that threshold of whether or not we would create a hardship for students if we charge any more than $520. Right now we have just a handful of students, less than a handful too, that would be interested in the NCAA Clearinghouse Acceleration course. All others would be as projected there. That's the conclusion of our presentation. I'd be happy, and Laura will be happy to answer any questions you have, not just about this particular slide, but anything about the presentation overall.
Questions about summer school? Ms. Fuller?
Yes, thank you so much. What kind of feedback are you receiving from the students who have gone through the program?
So the students are telling us that it's much more rigorous than prior summer school, and that it's a lot of work. But we did have over a 90% success rate with students being able to complete the course and demonstrating through both either acceleration or remediation that they were ready to move on.
And how are we promoting this service to our students and their parents?
So through our counseling, through our counseling office, students are aware, and there will also be a brochure that's issued shortly from the assistant principal's office, who is our administrator of summer school. So that information will go out. Will also be part of the principal's newsletter and an e-blast when we have our enrollment window.
Thank you.
Mr. Donatello?
Mr. Caparotto,
Yes.
you had mentioned pre and post assessments for
Yes.
the children, the students. What was different between this program and the old program for pre and post assessment?
Great question. So prior to this model, which allowed students to be assessed online, all students came in, and the assumption was that they needed to take the entire course over again. So we didn't have a diagnostic tool to determine when they took the course, how much did they master, and where do we target remediation. Now, students are coming in, of course, with varying degrees of mastery, and so we're not asking them to repeat the entire course. We're simply saying, here are the gaps for you, and this is where you need work and support, and then demonstrate mastery through an assessment versus the student next to you.
The students, you had 26 students opted to take the Keystone. How many students needed to take the Keystone? I mean, how many kids do we have in danger of?
That's actually a difficult prediction. So we know if they were unsuccessful in the course that they might have not been proficient on the Keystone, but since the May is typically the end of course Keystone, we don't get those results until July. So that poses an issue. The kids who had a sense of having issues based on benchmarks and other diagnostics they were given as part of their course took part in that Keystone, as well as course repeaters. So kids who had already been unsuccessful one time and were already in recovery.
One last question. In 2014, how many students took the accelerated, or did they offer an accelerated program for students to take this summer school?
Yeah, we don't have the numbers teased out for you, but yes, students were taking both the accelerated and remediation at that time. We can get those numbers for you.
Does this promote more kids to try to take a step up in the summertime because of this technology?
It does, because of the flexibility. So more students are interested in taking that acceleration course, so they have room during the school year for other courses.
Thank you, that's it.
Mr. Valerie?
Yes, I see the salary and coursework costs up here. I don't see any overhead costs, for keeping the rooms open and things like that. And when I look at something that looks like a profit over here, I'm thinking maybe we ought to also explain that there were some overhead costs that are also included in here, and we're not really making a profit off of our students.
Well said. I don't have access to those costs, but I agree with you. Obviously, the school is open for the hours that the students are using the labs, which would be 3 hours a day, Monday through Thursday. And also, we do offer additional lab hours for those students who may not have access at home.
Dr. Metzl?
Yes, thanks. First of all, a note of appreciation to all three of you. It's great to be in a district where the success of the programs is continually being evaluated and people are continually trying to improve it. So I really appreciate that. I did have a couple of questions. One is, I remember last year the discussion about the hybrid model. There was some question about, I think I might have even taken off my shoes to calculate the sort of number of hours per student, per teacher in the lab. There was some question about whether or not 3 hours Monday through Thursday was adequate for the numbers. Can you speak to how that ended up working out?
So based again, there was a progress window that students could see that they were on pace with the coursework that they had, and that was relative to the diagnostics. So let's pretend the course was 12 parts. If 6 parts they already demonstrated mastery, they would have 6 parts scattered across that 5 weeks and that progress bar. Meanwhile, when they would come in for their 3 hours, they would be conferencing with one of the lab coaches who would meet with them one-on-one and talk about the work schedule for the week for that student. So how many lessons would be appropriate to complete, or what they might need help on in terms of where they demonstrated a distinct lack of mastery. So it was very much individualized, and that would be what we would hope to continue in the model this year. Did we have students who came every day? We had one student who we were concerned could be a non-grad, and she came every day based on what her needs were. So it was very flexible in that sense.
And was there sufficient staffing so that students got the attention that they needed?
We didn't seem to have an issue with that, no. Luckily, just the way things worked out, again, I think we had our morning sports practices, so you would have a crop of students arrive around 9 a.m. We had a flexibility. We had kids that showed up right at 8 o'clock in the morning, and it never seemed to be an issue where a student could not get help based on the lab coaches at that time. So they were all in the library. It was all centralized. Okay. And that would be the model I believe we'd look to do again.
Okay, great. And then I wanted a follow-up on Mr. Donatelli's question about the Keystone figures. So do I understand correctly, the part that I find confusing is that it says 50% moved to proficient, but what you're saying now is actually, the baseline is a diagnostic. It's not, they didn't actually move from being not proficient on a Keystone exam to being proficient. I guess what's the movement?
No, I'm sorry, the movement is out of the 26 who chose to retake,
Yes.
13 of them moved to proficient. So they were not proficient on a past Keystone exam, and they moved, so they were the ones who opted. And I believe Mr. Donatelli's question was about, students opting in. The students who test in May are sometimes not aware whether or not they were proficient or not proficient.
Okay, so then my question about that then is, do you know, I mean, they have these rough categories of proficient and not proficient and so forth, but they also have scores, do they not?
Correct.
So of the 26 who took it, were the 13 who moved into proficient the ones that were closest already to becoming proficient? And that is how much, what is the bump that this was providing, you know?
I don't have that data right now. I have.
Yeah, we do know. I mean, we can provide that information. We don't have it this evening.
Yeah.
But you're right. They have a raw score, they have a projected score, and then they have their actual score. The first time they took it versus the second time they took it. So we can provide you that information based on 26 students.
But is it your sense that it was the people closest to the?
Not necessarily. And again, through all of our remediation, there are students who, maybe had a bad day the first time they took the Keystones, and with remediation jump, a good number. And then there are other students who, only needed 5 points to get to proficient, and they were able to do that. So we see it across the board.
Do students ever take a Keystone, they test not proficient, and then take it again without additional instruction?
No, we're not. In order for us to retest, we must provide them remediation.
Okay.
That's a PE thing.
So we don't know a baseline of, there's some certain percentage of students who, again, they had a bad day, they would require nothing, and they would pass it the next
Right.
time.
The remediation we do provide, though, we do benchmark along the way. So if a student had a bad day, shows up for remediation, takes the benchmark, and is proficient on the benchmark, then there's a very good chance that we would take them out of remediation because they're then prepared. They've demonstrated they're already prepared for the Keystone.
And then a question about the new vendor, eLearn21. My understanding from the presentation is that one of the great advantages of the hybrid model this past summer was what you pointed out, the sort of differentiated learning, the sort of range of options that they could offer to students, which made it not, the flexibility didn't just make it more popular, but the range of offerings did. Does eLearn21 offer the same level of differentiation and the same range of options to students as the previous vendor did?
It actually has much more than the previous vendor since it was one vendor. eLearn21 is actually a composite of 3. So you saw me mention Edison as one vendor. Accelerate Ed is another, and it's frequently used even with elementary students. And then there's a third vendor as well, and they go through the action of vetting vendors and making sure that, again, they're compliant with changes at state level. In terms of aligning to our curriculum, we saw the advantage in more of our electives aligning with what was offered through the Accelerate Ed portion, that specific vendor.
Great, and thank you. Once again, it's great to see that the district is working on perfecting these models and making it better. So I appreciate it.
I had a question on the pre and post testing. I presume that they're taken on the computer. Do you have an idea what the average is like with the pre-test? Would it be an hour or a day, or what's the average time to get that? And then there's a plan set up as to what the outcome is there?
Sure. We actually intentionally had them, as this was a new model for us, take the pre-test in front of us on designated dates. And I would say it varied from some students finishing in 45 minutes very quickly up to an hour and 45 minutes for the pre-diagnostic.
Champagne?
Yes, a couple questions. For the students that are taking the acceleration classes online and versus the ones that are in the building, is there any difference in the level of instruction that they're receiving? You mentioned that the online course was much more rigorous, much more challenging than had maybe been the in-school class previously. Is there any differentiation that students see, or?
So let me clarify that when we were talking about the remediation course, when a student failed a course and came to summer school for remediation, they would walk into a class and a teacher would have a set curriculum that they tried to teach the entire class in 5 weeks. And so we compare that model to students now who walk in with varying degrees of mastery, and we're able to target their needs. And so in doing so, students found that much more challenging because there was more work required and that was more rigorous. When you look at the acceleration classes in the past, again, we prepackaged the course that we taught within a 5-week period of time, versus now these students will take the entire course that would normally be offered during the school year, but through an accelerated model.
Okay.
So there will be more rigor. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so I mean, are you anticipating more, are you kind of suggesting to students, if you really want to move on through the course, go the online route versus the in-school route, or how are you presenting that kind of as an option to the students?
I can't say that we're looking at the acceleration or the 5 or the 8-week acceleration as a replacement for our actual math curriculum, because we lose some of that collaboration in the classroom, and we certainly aren't trying to race our students through the math sequencing. That being said, there were advantages to students who were trying to complete prerequisites or, again, comply with the NCAA, so we want to keep that as a summer school offering. But I believe our 180-day math courses have a lot to offer. One of the unique things I saw in the summer school model was a reluctance on the students' part to sort of transfer what was happening on their screen to paper. And so there's, in math, that presents somewhat of a challenge, and I think we really think that the rigor is appropriate in our year-long courses, that this model, again, allows us to individualize, but it would be a recommendation we'd make for the entire student population.
Just last question, like on the experiential classes, driver's ed, health, and so on, are they going to, those that are going to be able to be taken online, will they also require an in-presence every week, or are those, I mean, the lab is just for the math?
No, the lab is for all courses that are taking cyber.
Okay, so you, even if you're taking driver's ed and health, you will be required to come in?
That's correct.
Okay.
Dr. Clark, just a quick question. I want to follow up on Dr. Munson's comments. The 3-hour requirement, was that something the school district thought was appropriate, or was that coming from the vendor of the curriculum?
That was based on another model that we had looked at that we thought would work for our students. So it was the initial requirement, and then it was tailored to, once again, we assess student
So
progress.
are we going to go with that number as a requirement?
As minimum,
model
yeah.
as well?
Any other questions? Ms. Allen?
With the driver ed, is that mostly the state rules that they go over? Do they actually get in a car?
This would be the equivalent of the in-classroom driver ed instruction, which is not to be confused with the on-the-road training.
Okay. But the on-the-road still exists?
That is correct.
Okay, good.
That's called driver training, as opposed to driver education. The driver education is a required class of all the students as part of the Pennsylvania standards. Driver training is optional. If they take it, though, they get certain advantages, like they might qualify for discounts on their insurance, and they get some additional experience beyond what their parents or other adults might do. Any other questions?
And if I could just introduce Mr. Josh Miller, one of our assistant principals. He will be the principal in charge of summer school this year. So he wanted to be here this evening to hear the questions that you asked. And next year, he'll be up here with me. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you very much for the presentation, folks. We're going to move right along to the long-range fiscal and capital plan. We've been working on this, and really, as McCall and Jim Frank have been working very hard on giving the board a better idea of long-range planning, of really trying to make very educated estimates on what the financial picture looks like for each Penn in the future. So Mr. McCall is going to present the first part of that, which is really just a summary of what we looked at. I would like to follow up with a summary of what's called district initiatives. You've seen before, but I want to refresh everybody's memory, and then at that point, we certainly can open it up for questions. That's okay. So, Mr. McCall.
Good evening.
Before I get into the long-range plan, a big piece of that is working off the 2016-17 budget. It's the basis for what the projections drive out. So quickly, I'll go through where we are. Good to have a tech guy. So where were you at in January when you approved the preliminary budget? You started with $7.8 million on the fund balance. The revenues were $137 million, almost $145 million in expenditures. Ending fund balance was projected at $4.4 million. Your fund balance usage was 3.4. The millage increase was 4.82%, and to the average household, the residential household, that would be $174 increase. Since then, the following changes have occurred. We've reduced the millage down to 3.1%. Most of that, in fact, was due to the restructuring of the debt that you did a month ago. And then the following are subsidy increases, all from the state. We got the new numbers for the 2015-16 subsidies, and off of those, we've put in a 2% increase. The governor's looking at 4.4%. We're trying to be conservative and look at a 2% increase. So the basic ed subsidy, Ready to Learn grant, special ed subsidy, and are all going up by 2%. The debt service subsidy is reduced because we have reduced debt service payments because of the restructuring, and then some minor changes to the Social Security and retirement subsidy. On the expenditure side, you approved an Act 93 agreement last month. There were some changes that were on that agenda that increased some administrative salaries. They were included. The retirement Social Security piece of that increase. CLIU general costs were up $2,000. LCTI tuition came down $4,600. In reviewing the mid-year review of special education services, we added a little over $100,000 to those costs. The debt service dropped a little over $2 million from the restructuring, and then I adjusted the budgetary reserve to come to a flat $4 million, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. So those were changes in expenditures. And then what that does, we kept the beginning fund balance at $7.8 million. The revenues are now at $135.6. Expenditures, $142.5. Ending fund balance would go up to almost $5 million. Fund balance usage is down to $2.8 million. Again, the millage increase proposed at this time 3.1%, and that increase, the average household is $112, about a $62 decrease from preliminary budget approval back in January. So that kind of segues into where we are with this long-range plan. The background is, as I sat here at the one board meeting I was at and listened to comments, it seemed like there was a lot of desire to know where the budget would be heading, not just next year. What is the impact of all the things that we're talking about, the restructuring, Dr. Schilder's priorities. So I had a plan a couple of school districts ago that I used for districts I was in. I said to Dr. Schilder, I can show it to you. Maybe it's something you'd be interested in that we could tailor to East Bend. He liked it. We started working on that, and we've gotten to a point now where we can share it with the board. Not quite ready for the public yet, but the purpose of it is to understand the impact of decisions you're making, maybe on priorities you might add in. What does that do down the road? Also helps provide a basis for future decisions. What you're doing now or what you may want to do, will it fit into your budget a couple years down the road? There's a sensitivity analysis that takes different scenarios or options that you can run against the baseline to see what that impact is long range. That's a part of the plan. There's a lot of flexibility. You can adjust assumptions as needed and as things change. The plan itself can be modified to the needs of the district. So that's a fluid document that can be adjusted as time goes on. And the goal is to assure everyone that the best education is being provided here for maximized tax dollars. So hopefully it addresses both sides of interest. Part of putting this plan together is devising some criteria that you're going to base your decisions on. And Dr. Schilder and I came up with these 5 in order of criteria. First one being to maintain all your educational programs as they're currently offered or provided. Next, you want to maintain the buildings that you've paid for and built and put together over the years. You don't want unplanned maintenance and repairs happening. You want a plan in place that you're going to maintain these buildings and a way to fund that plan. You want to provide for a healthy fiscal policy where you have a minimum fund balance. You do have a fund balance policy that says you should have a 5% fund balance. You also have a budgetary reserve policy that says you should have 5% of your budget put in there in case of any contingencies that you didn't plan on. They're kind of one and the same, and they work together, and probably something that we should talk about in the future. Approve real estate tax increases at when possible or at or below the state mandated index. I think there might be some people who say they would want no increase whatsoever, but I think the goal is to try to minimize any real estate tax increase going forward. And then the last thing would be when resources allow to improve educational programs, when you can do that. So how the plan works is you utilize the proposed budget, being the 2016-17 budget, for revenues and expenditures. You look at a number of projections that the user defines for all areas of the budget to project going out several years. It helps project future fund balances through these calculations so you can see the impact of any decisions you may make and how next year's budget impacts future budgets. And especially in the case where you've used fund balance the last couple of years, you want to know, continuing going forward, how far can that fund balance last? What can you do to build the fund balance back up? So it helps prepare for that. And also the plan has a tax impact spreadsheet, two of them, one for just the next year's budget at different assessed values, and then one that looks at the entire plan. So you can look at different assessed values and say, what's the impact on that assessed home 5 years out? So it kind of addresses a lot of different areas so that you can look at what you're doing in next year's budget and how does it affect following 4 years. So the number of assumptions in there right now, real estate assessments and the tax that gets generated from that. There's assumptions for all the local revenues, the state and federal subsidies. There's a page that lists all the salaries by group and lists the increases that have been approved for each one of those areas over the life of the plan. Same thing with benefits. It works off the salaries. It projects healthcare costs based on trends. There are 70 different line items for general costs in here. Some are grouped together when the assumptions are put together because they're things under your control and they're very easy to say might be a 1.5% increase for these 25 items. There are also specific areas that are pulled out, such as special education, transportation, any number of areas that really don't follow what might be a general cost. And then the debt service is per a schedule. It's not a trend. You know the schedule is going out 20 years if it goes that far. This is just a sample from that page of the assumptions that are used. I'm not going to go over and read these to you. You can expand this as much as you want in this document. It's a very fluid spreadsheet. If you want to have a assumption line for every line in the budget, you can do that. It really would be unnecessary, but if you wanted to do it, it can be done. So the conclusions are, we're not going to get into all the details of what this whole plan has developed. One thing Dr. Schilder and I talked about is Bob Saul, your new business administrator, starts in 3 weeks. We thought it'd be a good idea for him to be a part of this plan and really be the next person to present more detail on what the plan is all about. He has a copy of it. I spoke with him today about it, so he's on board with how this whole thing works. So you have a proposed budget that needs to be approved in 4 weeks, May 9th. Final approval is scheduled for June 13th. That's 9 weeks away. So you have 9 weeks really to finalize the things you need to do in your budget. Two of the things that are outstanding right now are implementation of any of the priorities Dr. Schilder has talked about and is going to talk about in a moment, and final millage adoption. Right now we're at 3.1%. My recommendation is priorities are not to stay at that level just because of the fund balance has been depleted a little bit, and I would recommend that you try to look at replenishing that over the next year plus. utilize this tool to make your current and future educational decisions. I think it gives you a lot of flexibility and a lot of understanding of what decisions you make and how they're going to impact the budget going forward. And the last thing is I think you should discuss that budgetary reserve and fund balance policies to make sure they're working together properly and they're getting you to a point that you want to be with your fund balance. I'm going to let Dr. Schilder talk about a few things and then we will take questions.
Okay, I just want to go over, I'm not going to go over this entire thing. A lot of it you will remember from the last time I presented. And I'll just quickly comment. This is very similar to the priorities or the criteria that Dennis just talked about. Stated slightly differently, but really the same thing. It's what I call the competition for the use of funds. In any school district, there's an internal competition on what revenue and how the budget should be balanced. Maintaining the quality of the school district, of course, is important. Avoiding over-reliance on fund balance is important. Keeping taxes at or below state mandated index, you heard that before, and making improvements to the educational programs and the fiscal plan as needed. These are the items that we've included in the budget so far. You've seen these before. We did budget restoration to both the buildings and the departments to make up for the 5 to 10% cuts that were put in place last year or for this current year. That's back in, so that's restored. We have money devoted to Project Lead the Way, which you've heard about that in presentations from the Curriculum and Instruction Office. Secondary science resources, the same. Middle school literature resources, that is an initiative, and we put some money in for that. We want to strengthen our elementary writing program through resources of $27,000. Our elementary Read 180 program is a special ed program that has worked well in middle school, that we would like to move the appropriate version of that down into the elementary grades. K-12 ESL resources are needed, and the district climate survey. So those are just some of the highlights of what I would call new initiatives that currently are in the budget. This is a consolidation of several slides that you saw before. Basically, what I'm focusing on here, and what Dennis McCall was referring to as the superintendent's initiatives or district needs, you have priority one, recurring costs. So these basically are staff members that, in my opinion, from gathering information and assessing the school district, these are things we're going to need for 16-17. The Alberta's teacher, that's a class size reduction. Without that, we're looking at class sizes of 31 or 32 in one of either next year's second grade class or the fifth grade class. School resource officer, we talked about a lot last year. It is still my very strong recommendation and opinion that we need a school resource officer at our high school. We're one of the few high schools in the area that does not have one. And I'm recommending that for 3 reasons. School resource officer serves as a deterrent. The response time to respond to an active shooter is dramatically decreased, which frankly saves lives. And overall safety. Is the high school safe? Yes. It could be a lot safer with an SRO. Special ed staff, that more than likely will be a PDE compliance issue. We are looking at additional students coming into the autistic classrooms that we're going to need additional support for. Otherwise, we'll be over the number of students that are allowed in that classroom. Middle school ESL teacher, we've talked about before. We actually had put that in place the middle of this year, but it was after the budget was developed. Therefore, I wanted to reflect it as a carryover cost that we'll need for next year as well. That is also a compliance issue. And then the assistant principal supervisor, I think last time we talked about this, I had 2 up there. I've decreased that to 1, in which we would probably, if we were able to have this position, we would split it between the two largest elementary schools, both of which are over 700 students. And one of those schools, Shoemaker, containing very high needs special ed populations within that building. So that is it. So they're the recurring costs, priority one needs. Now there's also priority one-time costs. Science text resources, again, goes back to some of the initiatives that you've seen, the emphasis on STEAM at the high school and middle school. This one actually is for the high school, and that program being long overdue for revision. And then student computers, and you'll see that down also with priority 2 and 3. Basically, it's $100,000 a year. We have a tech committee, which at some point when they're completed their work, they will be giving you a presentation on how that's been going and our conclusions and recommendations. But one of the areas that seems very clear is that we are really getting further and further behind with hardware, just sheer hardware. And I think I mentioned this in a report to the board earlier. We had students come in, high school students come in and talk to the tech committee, and it was a very, very valuable 3 hours. I was hung up on, well, should we be really worried about putting Macs in the classrooms, or should we put laptops, or should we put Chromebooks, what kind? And then basically, at least what I got out of it, they looked at us and said, we don't care what you give us, just give us stuff that works. And they would give us examples of hardware that just didn't work, or they didn't have access to because there weren't enough of them. And they said, whatever you give us, we will learn, and we will probably learn it quicker than what any of you will learn, although they said that in a nice way. But we need more hardware, we need equipment. So that's what prompted me to put that in as a priority one-time cost. You can argue that it's not really a one-time cost because you can go down there and see it again, but it's not a recurring cost like a staff member would be. So yes, priority 2 and 3, in subsequent years, I would love to see another $100,000 each year. Now this would be over and above what the regular tech budget is at now. That's what enables us to kind of get ahead a bit. And then finally, concluding with priority 2 and 3, the web-based time management system and the web-based applicant tracking system, 2 relatively small numbers, but needed for increased efficiency within the HR department. Now, I have not put in priority 2 and 3 recurring costs. I did share that with you before, and you've seen that, you have spreadsheets on that. I didn't feel that would needed to be the focus tonight. Or because really, we just have to worry about 16-17 budget. And there's so many unknowns, there's so many issues happening at the Department of Ed, plus maybe our needs will shift. So that's why you don't see that. You don't see priority 2, you don't see priority 3 recurring costs. I did want to mention capital reserve projects for 16-17. These are the 4 main projects that we have right now slated to move ahead with. The chiller replacement at Jefferson School for roughly $250,000. Security cameras at the high school, IRE, and LMMS. And those would be the main capital reserve projects that we would put in place for 16-17. And again, you have a spreadsheet on projections of capital reserve projects that we'll need. I believe that's a 6-year spreadsheet. That could change. Tonight I just wanted to focus on 16-17. So that is hopefully a quick way to give you an up-to-date view of, let's call it the district needs, that most of the last couple slides here are not reflected in the budget at this current moment. So at this point, we can go back to Dennis McCall's presentation, and you can reference questions there, you can reference questions in my presentation, and we'll be happy to take questions.
Okay. Let's start with questions rather than commentary. I like this, I don't like this. So that way we'll all make sure we all understand. So questions about this document?
Yeah, 2. So one was just on your very last comment, Dr. Schilder. I want to clarify if I understand the list of additional district needs, 2016, 2017, priority one, priority, all this list. Are any of these things in the current revised budget for 2016, 17?
They are not.
So none of these are included yet?
That's correct.
Okay. A second question I have.
However, I'm
Yep.
sorry to interrupt you. The sensitivity analysis, though, that Mr. McCall ran on one of the slide or one of the pages of the long-range report that you have received, which of course is still in draft form, does project out if these priorities were included. So you can get a sense of how that, and it's all projected out at that 3.1% tax millage. So you can, what it does, of course, is change the fund balance. And you can run right through that and see how that works. See how it works to include this, to include some of it, and that's outlined for you on that page. It says sensitivity analysis page.
Thank you. Another question. I remember the last budget presentation that there was a need, another capital project was to bring security cameras to Lincoln to
Yes.
make them equivalent. I don't see that here.
That's because we're going to take that out of the current year's budget.
Okay, so that'll be done.
And that'll be done. We're taking that out of the current general fund. And part of the reason we were able to do that was with the debt restructuring was we were able to capture some additional money that we were, about $75,000, that we did not have to incur for the debt restructuring because of the way the plan you approved it. So we picked up money there and we decided to take some of those projects, the smaller ones, that's why you don't see that here. That will be done at the end, by the end of this year.
Okay. I'll hold off on my last. It leads into commentary.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm afraid I have a lot of questions. I've submitted a lot of them ahead of time, but there's a couple I need to ask before we get into the questions I submitted. Mr. McCall related about two balance policies. He said we had a fund balance policy. I know we have a reserve account policy, but not a fund balance policy that I'm aware of. Is there some number or some internal policy that I'm not aware of for the fund balance as opposed to budgetary reserve?
It's, I think it's policy 620, Mr. Frank, correct?
Yes.
Yeah, we discussed this over the weekend, and he pulled these two policies up from online from the district website. So the fund balance policy says you should maintain a 5% fund balance or budgetary reserve, so it gives you the flexibility to do one or the other.
Well, I was aware of the budgetary reserve policy, because that has a fixed amount in it.
And that's policy 604, Chuck, which is the budgetary reserve policy that you're referring to.
Okay. 604 is the one you want, huh? Okay.
But there's another.
And then 620 says you can, if you have the 5% in the budgetary reserve, you don't.
It makes up for the 5% in fund balance,
So
because
it's not-
really at the end
it's not
of
5%
the year.
on top of the.
Exactly. It's one or the other.
Okay. You also made the comment that the fund balance was, quote, depleted a little bit. How many $1 million is a little bit?
Well, I think from when it was at its height, maybe 13 million, I think the projection for next year, as you have seen, is down to 5 million.
So
That's because of continued fund balance usage. I went back to 14, 15, and there was usage that year, 15, 16, and we're proposing for next year as well.
Yes. Is my addition of these priority one costs at $888,000 correct?
I thought it was a little less than that. I thought it was 695, but
I just added up the numbers that are present on the page there.
Did you add up recurring costs and one-time costs?
Yes.
Okay.
Well, for the first year, they're all the same. What we need next year, or this year's proposed budget, would include all of those numbers.
No, it would include the first two, because 2 and 3 would happen in years 2 and 3, 17, 18, and 18, 19. If you look at 2 and 3 in the bottom, Those would impact, but down the road. So the ones that would impact next year would be the first two groups of
Okay,
numbers.
so you're saying that priority 1 is for this year and priority 2 and 3 are for next year?
2 and 3 are for 17, 18, and 18, 19.
Okay. So let's go on to my questions, which you responded to. I believe the statement in your overview page, which you gave us, had those two numbers juxtaposed between budget and operating expenses, leaving a number between the two of them that should have included the fund balance in the operating expense in order to see what the actual structural deficit was for this year. But there is currently in the proposed budget a structural deficit, correct?
Yes. I believe it's 6.9 million when you include the 4 billion of budgetary reserve. I think I pulled that out because you don't anticipate spending it. So to me, in effect, the deficit is really 2.9 million. But by definition, if you looked at revenues and expenditures, it would be 6.9.
So in the budget as proposed, prior to putting any priorities in, we already have a $2.9 million proposed shortfall on revenues versus expenses.
Right, the fund balance usage that you would need, yes.
Okay. So budgetary reserve is basically used as a savings account for the district in a sense that it puts money away that is not encumbered by current expenses to be used in case of emergency or unforeseen fiscal requirements during the year.
And I would say it doesn't put money away, it doesn't put it into a fund, it's in your expenditure side of the budget to use if you would overexpend the rest of your budget. It doesn't actually go into any kind of account, or it's a part of your assets of the district.
It's sort of your liquid assets for the district.
Yes.
As people say, for home people at home, you should have a savings account with so many months of expenditures of your household in it as an emergency fund.
And that's where I would say that would be your fund balance.
Yeah, Ms. Ballard, perhaps this would be better characterized as not budgeting your entire income, but spending less than your income in your household budget would be a better equivalent. Knowing that you have those funds available to spend if there's a need. I think that's a much better analogy.
Well, that may be true, but also you don't accumulate budgetary reserve to replenish anything that's taken out of it.
No.
Okay.
No, because you're funding it with fund balance, really. When you start at the beginning of the year, the only way you're funding that in this budget is by using your fund balance to have that available. If you didn't use that, you wouldn't have it to put in the budget.
Yeah, fund balance is a term that a lot of people don't fully realize all the ramifications of it. Fund balance is simply the difference between what you thought you were going to spend and what you actually spent in that sense.
Fund balance is, by definition, the difference between your assets and liabilities. It's not your revenues and expenditures. It's where I think it gets confusing for people.
Well, we don't count the value of the buildings and the assets of the district in that sense in the fund balance. This is only talking about money in and money out.
On your balance sheet, if you look back at your audit report, it will show you assets and liabilities before you get to those buildings. And the difference between those two would be your fund balance.
And so if we expend the fund balance down to the point where we have no more fund balance, we have no funds to be available for emergency expenses. We have no money to be able to be used to shore up next year's budget or whatever year it occurs, correct?
That would be correct.
Okay. So the danger in running a structural deficit is that you expend all of your available fund balance without replacing the revenues that are necessary to meet the expenditures of the district.
Okay.
So last year, when we were having the budget discussion, I brought up the fact that we were having a structural deficit in the budget, and was told that the situation was essentially a one-time situation, that it was felt that next year the revenues would pick up sufficient to cover the expenditures of the district, and therefore we would not be running a structural deficit in the proposed budget. But now we're being told that we are running a structural deficit, a larger structural deficit than what we had previously for this year's budget. And I need to know what was wrong in that assessment that we would be able to recoup that after 1 year. Is it the revenues were anticipated too high? Or was it the expenditures were running too high, too low? I mean, what is the...
Without having been here,
It's not fair to ask that question, Mr. McCall, since he was not here.
Right, so I want to jump in on that one, please. First of all, Mr. Ballard, it was never said that it was a one-time structural deficit. Never said. Said that we were hoping for light at the end of the tunnel, and that revenue was looking like it was going to pick up. And in fact, we have budgeted for revenue picking up. Never said that there would be a one-time structural deficit. Some of the projections now that Dennis McCall has done shows that we could be out of using it as a structural deficit as soon as 18-19. And in fact, the difference between 16-17 and 17-18 is substantial in terms of the use of fund balance required to balance the budget, going from 16-17, roughly 2.9, to a little less than $1 million in 17-18. But hopefully by 18-19, we could be out of that structural deficit. So just those two responses I would offer.
Well, I think it was characterized a little bit more strongly as to what the light at the end of the tunnel was.
And I don't respect, I do not believe I said that.
Well, Mr. Ballard, I believe we are approved by PDE for how big a tax increase? What is the total we were approved for?
4.87.
So if you wish to go forward with a 4.87% tax increase, we can probably get rid of most, if not all, that structural deficit. So it's a trade-off. Do we want to have a much larger tax increase than necessary, or are we willing to endure a structural deficit? But like I said, let's ask questions about the presentation, not philosophy of whether we should have it or not, so we make sure everyone understands what's been presented, and then we'll come back for a second round of questions about what it should be, what it shouldn't be, what our priorities should be.
I'm glad you're trying to frame the conversation in a certain way, Mr. Shaw. The BES numbers used in the current budget, it is my understanding at the time the presentation was made that those were based on the governor's proposal, the 2015-16.
15-16. That's right. It's 11,552,000, I believe.
The actual money, which we just got the spreadsheets within a day or two of showing what the proposed total amount received by East Penn for the basic education subsidy. The numbers I've seen were less than the governor's anticipated numbers for those items. There was not a 4% increase in the basic education subsidy. There was less than a 2%.
The 4% is for 16-17.
No, there was another 4% proposed for 15-16.
That's not what's in the budget. That's not what's projected for 15-16 in this document. What's projected is what the governor just released last week, a split between basic ed and a ready-to-learn grant, which totaled $11,552,000. That's what's in here now.
We couldn't have done that before yesterday because the numbers weren't out.
Well, these numbers, I believe, came out on Thursday.
Yeah, last week we saw them, they came from PASBO. PASBO sent them out.
But they are less than we originally estimated in the 15-16 budget, I believe.
They are less, but they are what they are being proposed right now by the governor.
Right.
No, not exactly. because the governor's proposal now, again, is another increase. But as I indicated to the administration, the words I'm getting from Harrisburg are more likely, because of the $2 billion state structural deficit, more likely to be flat funded at best for the education budget, not any increase at all over what was received for 2015 and 16.
Okay, Mr. Ballard, just, if you're going to start challenging a lot of the numbers, I just want to make sure that any other questions about the presentation have been answered. That way we're all on the same page going forward. Does anyone have any questions about the presentation, things that they didn't understand or wanted some clarification on before we start picking it apart?
I got a question, kind of what came out of this recent conversation with the fund balance and the budgetary reserve. I thought the budgetary reserve was a lot of money that had to be kept aside for emergencies. The fund balance was more like a slush fund. That could be
I don't think we use that term, slush fund.
No, there's no such thing as a slush fund, Mr. Donato.
I'd really like to hear him.
I've had this discussion, I think, 12 times over the last 4 years. Fund balance is what's left over at the end of the year. So let's say we budgeted $100 million and we spent $100 million, there would be no fund balance at the end of the year. But if revenues were higher than we budgeted and or expenditures were lower than we budgeted, that results in a fund balance at the end of the year. So if we budgeted $100 million, $101 million came in as revenue. We budgeted $100 million in expenses, only spent $99 million. There would be $2 million left over. That becomes fund balance. And budgetary reserve is an account. You cannot spend fund balance unless you allocate it as part of your budget at the beginning of the year. You can't just say, well, it looks like we're going to have more revenues than we expected, so we're just going to spend more money. You're limited by your budget to the total cap in spending, even if the revenues are much higher than you anticipated. So what happens is the fund balance becomes a beginning balance at the beginning of the next year. There's resources available to the district. You add projected revenues to give you your total resources available. Then you have an expenditure budget. And if your expenditure budget is less than what you've budgeted in terms of revenues, then you have a budgeted fund balance, but it cannot be spent. There is no slush fund. It can't be dipped into or touched for anything. A budgetary reserve is a special account that you create in your budget. In order to spend any of those, you can't use it for any expenditures without specific authorization of the board to transfer money from the budgetary reserve into another expenditure account. During the first 3 months of the fiscal year, that requires a 2/3 vote, if I remember right, of the board. After that 3 months, it only requires a majority vote of the board. But it would be transferred from budgetary reserve into any other spending account and can then be spent. But again, the total spending of the district is capped at that the total amount, including the budgetary reserve. Again, if you don't spend the budgetary reserve, it's like any other expense. It then falls into fund balance at the end of the year and becomes appropriate. You can use it to appropriate expenditures for the next year.
Okay, and I guess that was my question, because I'm hearing there's a policy 620 for the fund balance, and there's a policy 610, which I'm not familiar with.
I think it's 604.
Or 604 and 620. One or the other. So if we don't use the budgetary reserve and it comes to the fund balance, why do we up the budget then? Why don't we maintain the budget or not increase the fund balance? We're talking about potentially having to increase the fund balance or prop it up a little bit. Why do we need to do that?
The fund balance is the outcome of your budgeting at the end of the year of what happened during that year. So if revenues were higher than you expected, expenditures were lower. Let's say we had budgeted for textbook replacements, but then when we went to buy them, we didn't spend as much money on textbooks as we expected, or we had someone retire mid-year or take a leave of absence or quit to take a new job in another district. And it took us 2 months to replace that person. We saved 2 months of that person's salary and benefits. If we don't expend those funds, so that becomes fund balance, that then is our starting point for the next year's budget. We said those are resources available that we can budget to be spent.
So that we can help keep the numbers as low as possible.
Correct.
Okay, yeah, I understand. My other question was, back in December when we first kind of came on board, when you put your first budget together, Dr. Schiller, you had mentioned, or I had asked the question, did this include new incomes that were going to be coming in from new warehouses coming online? The new shopping center going up in Hamilton Cross. And I think at one point you indicated that no, that wasn't included in the numbers, but then a week later, Mrs. Sertowald said it was. So I'm kind of in a conflict, so I'd like some clarification from Dennis. Our numbers, these additional tax monies that will be then eventually coming in, is that part of this long-term projection?
There is an increase in 16-17 of 0.6% in the assessments, which is what you're talking about. Going forward, there is almost 2% for the next 2 years to accommodate all those things you just spoke about.
New incomes.
New income, increased assessments, that would include commercial, residential, and then in the last 2 years it drops down because those TIF properties, I think, are going to go away a little bit. But yes, there is definitely an increase in next year.
They won't go away, they'll be fully built out
Fully built.
in the tax base.
I meant away from an increase in the budget. So yes, it is.
Dennis, could I ask you, is there anything else you could comment on? And I don't want to belabor the point of budgetary reserve and fund balance, but it is a complex discussion. Is there anything else that you would want to share regarding the questions that have been raised so far regarding those two things?
Part of your budget is that 5% budgetary reserve. It's a large number. It's funded by the fund balance because you don't have enough revenue to cover it at this point. So I'm going to say that it's over $7 million if you add in 5% for budgetary reserve. I would be hard pressed to find that amount of over expenditures in any budget. In my 30 years of doing this, I remember one year we overexpended the budget and it was by the board's design to move money to a capital reserve fund. I've never seen the budget overexpended other than that. I know it can happen, but $7 million built into your budget is a lot of money for unexpected costs that I don't think could occur. That's why I'm saying I think when Mr. Saul gets here, take a look at all those potential things that may happen and maybe adjust that percentage. And then the structural deficit will start to shrink. Because right now you're covering a lot of this budgetary reserve with fund balance, and it creates this structural deficit.
And again, I don't want to belabor the point or get into it tonight too much, but we have started to look at other school districts throughout the state, their budgetary reserve policies. First of all, some school districts don't have such a policy. You don't have to have such a policy. Those that do, we haven't found any of them that has a number in it above 2%. In fact, most of them is at 0.5% or 1% that we've seen so far. Ours is at 5%. So that's something I think we need to have a discussion with, not so much tonight, but down the road, fairly soon. And I think with our new business administrator coming on board, I'm sure they'll have some thoughts about that. But it's something we need to take a look at.
I'd like to just correct something you said. I think you said that if we didn't have the fund balance, we wouldn't have a structural deficit.
Well, the budgetary reserve is.
I'm sorry, a budgetary reserve, we wouldn't have a deficit. But I think even taking the budgetary reserve out, as you have in your analysis, we still have a structural deficit.
Right now you would, but I think you would get out of that quicker without that large amount in there.
I understand.
No, I agree.
But we do have a structural
Yes,
deficit, just to be
absolutely.
clear, a
Yes.
structural deficit, even having no
Yes.
budgetary reserve in our budget.
That is correct.
Any other questions about the presentation? No? Okay, Mr. Ballard, back to you.
Okay, speaking about the budgetary reserve and that small number you were talking about, we've had this budgetary reserve policy for over 15 years that I know of.
Yeah, because it was adopted when I was on the board,
I have to go back and look at the policy of the adoption date, but it's been quite a while. And the reason was for financial stability, including for maintaining our bond rating. And it's often been cited by the Standard & Poor's and Moody's as being a factor in the excellent current bond rating that East Penn School District has. I've never seen any of these school districts that have reserve funds, 0.5% to 0.25%, as you stated in your response to my question. There are various other kinds of balances that can be used in addition to fund balance. You can have reserve balances for capital reserve. You can have balances for pension reduction. You can take a lot of the fund balance and encumber it with certain reserved funds. And if you take a look at the whole picture of fund balance and strictly reserved funds, you often find that school districts have much larger than 0.5% in those funds. Are you familiar with an organization called the Government Finance Officers Association?
No.
It's been around since 1919, and it has a number of, actually thousands of government finance officers across the United States, and they have a best practices section of their website that has a number of policies in it. And they basically have a number of 2 months operating expenses should be in whatever you want to call it, fund balance, budgetary reserve, or whatever, your funds that are left over at the end of the year for operation of the government entity. Now, we've never had anywhere near that number, even with the 13 million that may or may not have been there several years ago. And there are state restrictions to a total of 8% for your unreserved fund balance, so you can never get above that. What is your reference for the statement that we can have, it would be adequate to have a 0.5% budgetary reserve along with a, quote, normal cushion? What's the reference for that?
Well, if you look at that number, you're talking about 700,000, 0.25% is another 350, and in your variable rate debt, you have a variance there of about 600,000 or 700,000 next year. It was larger, so right there, that's probably about 1%, 1.4 million. And again, I'd be hard pressed to find where you would overexpend your budget by that much. In my last school district of a $90 million budget, we had a $300,000 budgetary reserve. We had an 8% fund balance, and we had the second highest bond rating we could get. So I think there's different ways to achieve that bond rating. It doesn't have to be just with a budgetary reserve.
And what was the total budget of that school district?
90 million. And we never exceeded the budget other than that one year that we transferred excess revenue in a very good year to our capital reserve fund.
Just as a matter of reference, Mr. Ballard, Parkland is carrying a budgetary reserve of 500,000. I'm sure their budget is bigger than ours.
So what would be the impact on the budget of overestimating the BES subsidy by 2%?
I think it's around 220,000. If it remained flat, that's not a large number. We're not talking millions or even $500,000.
So your basic recommendation is, as I understand it from the analysis provided, that this district run a structurally deficient budget for the next 2 years with the hopes of pulling out of that structural deficiency by the 3rd year.
It's not my recommendation, it's what the numbers are driving out, unless you're going to raise taxes much higher or make cuts to your budget. I don't think there's any other way out of it, and when you look at this long-range plan, you can see there's light at the end of the tunnel. So, I mean, I think, if you want that as a recommendation that you know there's a light at the end of the tunnel, I think that's what you keep doing instead of cutting your programs or raising taxes. I think of the 3 options, that's the best option, is knowing that you stay the course and know you're going to be out of that in a couple of years.
Okay, and so if we have these roughly $900,000 of priority 1 items that are not included in the budget yet, Where do we get the money for that?
I think that's something you analyze over the next month or so and look at this long-range plan. You drop those numbers in and see what it does long-range to your fund balance, and see if also you can get to the next couple of years by doing that. If the board as a whole agrees that's not a way to go, then you don't do it. I mean, yeah, that's the purpose of this plan, to look at the impact of some of these decisions so you know where you're headed, and not just doing it year by year and thinking or hoping that you're going to get somewhere that you want to get.
Okay, then I'll just make a comment. With structural deficiency in the budget, the problem is that unless you have a defined plan for eliminating that structural deficiency, all it does is pile up the amount of money you don't have at the end of each subsequent year. So you either have to have a plan for increasing the revenues or decreasing the expenses over that period in order to get out of a structurally deficient situation. Not having a balanced budget leads to a slippery slope where you can slide down very, very fast if any one of your assumptions goes bad, such as if it's, let's suppose it's not 2% additional BES, but it's 5% cut in BES in order to balance the state budget. There we are with another $600,000, $700,000 off of the budget that we didn't have to begin with, and our structural deficit just climbed a little bit. I am not inclined at this point to agree to continually increase the amount of our structural deficit without a plan showing how we're going to get out of it. So unless the budget includes, from my standpoint, an indication that, one, we are making attempts to reduce that structural deficiency in our current budget, the 2016-17, to get it down as low as possible, and we have a defined plan of what we're going to do in the revenue and expenditure area for the next 2 years in order to try to close that gap. I'm not going to vote for the budget as proposed. Thank you, Mr. Earnshaw.
Just for clarity, no budget has been proposed at this point. Okay, we'll be getting that, I guess, at our next meeting, the actual budget you're proposing.
Actually, not till May.
Okay.
Right? Okay.
May 9th.
May 9th. Two meetings from now. All right, Dr. Bucker.
I'll start by saying I share some of Dr. Ballard's concern about structural deficit. However, I would comment that it's not a hope. We do have a structural surplus in the out years of the budget based on the debt service payments. So if we don't build a school, we do have funding in the long-range plans to address the structural deficit. So I'm not saying that I'm happy with the amount that's in here, and we shouldn't take pains to limit the size of the structural deficit and limit the decrease in the fund balance or whatever you want to call it. But it isn't just a hope. There is a plan in the long-range plan that we've seen that utilizes the drop in debt service if we don't require building the school to address the structural deficit in long term. However, the farther it's out, the more stuff that can happen until we get there, and so it is a concern.
Any comments at this point? Go ahead, Mr. Johnson.
My understanding that this long-range plan is like the first time, I haven't seen this in a couple years I've been watching, sitting out there, school board meetings. It sounds like a pretty big accomplishment.
This was developed by Mr. McCall.
I assume with your.
Absolutely input from the
Thank you. I think this is an advantage for us as school board members to have something like this. And I'm looking forward to seeing it.
Thank you.
And we just want to take a little more time and clean up any, we want to make the best predictions possible. Once that's done, we anticipate doing it soon. We'll post it to the website.
This is a big help for me.
Back to the left.
Champagne?
A couple things. I think one thing that would be helpful for me personally is to understand what I consider to be kind of fixed and cost and what are, what I would say, discretionary. You know, I think of fixed things, you've got insurance, you've got debt service, you've got certain other fixed costs. And I know in a budget of 140 odd million, you're not going to have a big discretionary piece, because in reality, your teacher salaries, your retirement benefits, but I think it would be helpful for the board to understand what true flexibility you have or don't have when it comes to, if you're going to, you know, try to close the structural gap that we have and not draw down fund balance. So I'm just wondering if that could be built into the plan as a way to kind of help the board, you know, assess, okay, what are the triggers we can pull to, if we say, all right, we don't want to expend more and draw down the fund balance and, you know, have a bigger structural deficit.
I'm sure it can be done, and you're right, it's going to be a small number.
And I think it's helpful for us to understand what that number really is. I mean, I can think of, and I'm not suggesting at all anything by saying this, but athletics is discretionary in the true sense. You don't have to have athletic programs. Not that I would recommend cutting athletic programs at this point or anything like that, but those are the kind of things, and see the magnitude of that. So as we make trade-offs in what's a priority or what's not to be added to the budget. And then one last question, maybe.
Just so you know, Mr. Chairman, we have had those discussions in years past, so I mean, it's certainly an appropriate thing to remind us of what those few levers are.
I think it's just helpful to be part of the planning, you know, document or the model, so that you really do have, again, when you run scenarios or sensitivity analysis, you can see what happens. The other thing is the capital expenditures that are proposed in the 16-17 plan, those, we're taking those out of the capital reserve account, is that correct? So we're drawing down that account as well as drawing down the fund balance. So that account at some point is going to have to, again, be replenished through funds from the general fund.
That's correct.
That's all.
Everybody else, Ms. Allen?
I'd like to thank Dr. Schilder and Mr. McCall for putting this together. One of my concerns has been to see several years out what the money is going to be needed with these ongoing costs. And if I understand this correctly, is it possible to put in X and to find out what the amounts will be if things change?
Yes.
Just to play with, like to get models and so
And
forth.
that's the sensitivity analysis. You can do any number of things in there and determine what the impact is in the future.
It's very valuable to see if we do this, what happens. If we don't do this, what happens. And I think that's very helpful. So thank you, Dr. Schilder.
Everybody's had a first round comment who wants one. Mr. Valley?
Just a comment for Dr. Bacher. The current proposed preliminary budget, which is not a real budget, but it's the budget we have, has a $2.9 million structural deficit, and the bond restructuring only handles $1.8 million of that.
But I'm not talking about the bond restructuring, I'm talking about out-year payments to bonds. We don't get the structural surplus for 2 or 3
And
years.
we don't get that one until 2022, I believe.
No, we get
2018, 19, I think. Since when we pay off a significant portion of our indebtedness, and it'll drop by about 3.8 million per year in debt service payments. So immediately, a 3.8 million structural deficit would be made up at that point. Anything, a bigger deficit would have to be made up from other sources. A smaller deficit would end up with a surplus at that point.
Presuming no building program.
Well, even if we were to embark on a building program at this point, that's 2 years and 3 months from now. We don't see any need for building this year, I assume. We're not stretched to capacity, and with the PDE approvals and the plan comp process, if we even need to do that anymore, I guess we have to do it even though there's no state funds available for it. But yeah, all the approvals and everything else, it would be 2 years before we'd start borrowing money anyway for that. So at the very, very earliest. So I'm not too concerned about that.
Right now, we see no need for that. Lehigh Valley Planning Commission is coming in to talk to us in another couple of weeks. If they have different information regarding their demographic studies, we'll certainly share that with the board immediately. But preliminary conversations with them is that this school district and many other school districts in the area should not be considering building. because of the demographic projections, similar to what we heard, 2 years ago from the
Pennsylvania
Pennsylvania Economic League. So it sounds like the information is the same, but I'll verify that with you more within the next couple of weeks.
Just being out more of a country and dealing with this for the last 20 years, we have a pretty good set of commissioners out there now that are trying to maintain or just keep the growth down in the school district. And that's one of the goals, and hopefully we can keep those types of commissioners long-term.
The real concern is if Upper Milford starts building a lot more sewer systems, that could open up significant development there. And I don't have any idea what those are. Okay, any other questions or comments at this point? All right, I'm sure we'll have a very vigorous debate on your priorities in 2 weeks.
Very good.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr.
Dennis, thank you very much.
Our next item is the district update from President Dr. Schilder.
Okay, thank you. First thing I'd like to comment on is we are in a partnership right now with the Lehigh Valley Drug and Alcohol Administrator and the County Executive to launch a community forum on April 20th on drug and alcohol awareness in the Lehigh Valley, concentrating on the heroin problem. And we have a panel of presenters that will be at that meeting. East Penn is hosting it, as I said, at the high school in their auditorium. And we're looking forward to that. We invite anybody. Hopefully we'll get a real good attendance rate on that. A very important issue, very disturbing issue in terms of some would call the heroin epidemic that has hit not only Lehigh Valley, but many areas across the country. And the number of suspected deaths from heroin overdoses. So it'll be a very frank discussion. There'll be parents at that meeting who have lost children as a result of heroin, as well as authorities, like I mentioned. Lane Turner will be the facilitator. He is the Lehigh County Drug and Alcohol Administrator. We'll have representatives from the police department, fire and ambulance corps, Center for Humanistic Change, Pyramid Healthcare, Lehigh Valley Emergency Department, Lehigh Valley Hospital Emergency Department, and Lehigh Valley Coroner. So I encourage you to come out. Also want to thank Laura Grow, our community liaison, for working hand in hand with the county office on making this happen. Very brief comment on the proposed closing of 7 Generations Middle School. We do have a meeting set up tomorrow at 1 o'clock. And the we is Denise Torma, Assistant Superintendent, who is going to be serving as the primary liaison between 7 Generations and our board. Kristen Campbell will be there representing C&I, Linda Carrick representing Special Ed, and I will be there as well. We're going to further explore all the issues in the proposed amendment that 7 Generations presented to its board, and all issues related to ongoing communication, transition, PDE compliance, curriculum, and special education. And again, that meeting is at 1 o'clock, and I will board apprised as to where we are with that. Also, we'll be involving our board solicitor every step of the way in terms of this board's obligation and responsibility to work with 7 Generations on their proposed amendment. Another thing we'll be doing at that meeting tomorrow is sharing with them the third and final reading, actually, hopefully after tonight, it'll be the proposed policy that we have on charter schools. And I will take that and share with them as well, because that talks about the oversight requirements from us, the 7 Generations, their requirements for reports submitted to us, and so forth. You may have read in the paper that we did test all 11 sites in the district. including Lower Macungie Elementary School, which is leased out right now, but we tested all those sites for lead in the water, and all of them were well below the EPA's permissible level. So our water is safe. Now on to student and staff recognition. I wanted to mention, make some comments about the high school art program. We have 2 students who earned national recognition in the Scholastic Art and Writing Awards for 2016. Rachel Jabilian received a silver medal in drawing, and Efren Morales received an American Visions Medal in sculpture. So congratulations to those 2. Those students and their art teacher, Tracy Malley, have been invited to attend a ceremony at Carnegie Hall on Thursday, June 2nd, 2016. Also, at the high school, this is regarding student council. We received a notice a while back, an application, an invitation, let's say, for any student to apply to the Pennsylvania Association of Student Councils to potentially become a student member of the PA State Board of Education. So it was an interesting opportunity. We extended that to the high school, and we actually have a finalist. Lily Day, one of our students, is a finalist. Now, she hasn't been selected yet. She needs to go out, and she'll be going out there for interview. But she has a shot at being a member of the Pennsylvania State Board of Education. So she's very excited about that. We're very excited about that possibility. Keep your fingers crossed on that. And again, at our high school German program, we had 34 German students competed against students from 16 schools throughout the state, and once again came in first place. This is their 4th state title in 5 years. So congratulations to our German students and our German program and German teachers. That concludes my report.
To our German students, sehr gut. Any questions or comments for Dr. Schilder? Mr. Champagne?
How frequently are you looking at testing now? Are you going to do this on an annual basis?
Yes. We've always done it on an annual basis, but it's been random, which is, you're not required to test all buildings. Mr. Mishko and I had some preliminary conversations. We're inclined to test all sites annually. Is that correct?
That is correct. We will test them annually, correct.
I think that's what I would do.
Especially with all the attention in the press, it was a good time to make sure that we had safe water. Any other questions or comments? Dr. Munsell?
Yeah, I just wanted to ask a follow-up to the, I forgot the name of the woman who spoke at the beginning about 7 generations. What, beyond the policies that we will presumably adopt on the 3rd reading tonight, what direct responsibilities does this board have for addressing issues of student safety, administrative involvement, and so forth in charter schools when the charter derives from our district?
Beyond the policy, none. The policy is our responsibility. So receiving reports, monitoring, but I don't know that I can answer your question specifically. I can only go on what the way the law reads, and our policy is based on the law.
Okay, well, and I guess my follow-up would be beyond the responsibility, what ability, if any, do we have?
It's very limited.
Very limited.
But mostly we can hold them, when they came before us to renew their charter the last time, we conditionally renewed it. We placed a number of conditions that they had to meet where they were deficient in their operations, where they were not meeting the standards of the law and the standards of the Charter School Act, as well as serving student needs correctly. So we had those conditions. Had they violated or not complied with those conditions, their charter would have been revoked at that point.
But those are state conditions, not conditions that our district imposed?
No, we impose specific conditions under the framework of the law, the areas that we could evaluate, their curriculum and several other areas that we looked at. And so really that's the leverage we have is renewing their charter every 5 years.
We did have some concerns years ago, a few years ago, regarding curriculum. We had some recommendations. We had a follow-up visit last year. We sent a team into Senagen, took a look at their curriculum, took a look at the recommendations we had made and their ability or their desire to put those recommendations in place, which we came out satisfied with. So that's just one example of the follow-up. There is a requirement, I believe, in the policy where the superintendent is to meet with their CEO twice a year. We've done that. So those types of things. We want to make sure that we're right on top of it, particularly with the policy and making sure, and putting in mechanisms so that they're submitting reports to us as opposed to us having to go after those reports. We want to make sure we're both on the same page. And that'll be part of the discussion tomorrow.
Great, thank you. Ms. Allen?
I was just going to say that I think the accountability is very important, and I'm glad you have something in place for that. Not all charter schools, a lot of them that are private, let's say, not connected with a school district, don't have that accountability, so I'm glad to see that we do.
But as Mr. Earnshaw said, the accountability is limited. We don't have, I don't believe, I have the authority to go in and say, I think you have too many students being suspended, or there's a discipline issue there. It doesn't go that deep or that specific. It is more general, and it is definitely limited from the information that I've reviewed.
And I also don't think it covers student safety or some of those other issues that we're not responsible for from a legal standpoint.
I think you're correct. Yeah, PSBA has for a long time pushed for greater accountability under the charter school law. Since every charter school has to be chartered by a school district in the Commonwealth, somebody has to be responsible for monitoring it, but they need to give the districts some kind of tools to use to make sure they are in compliance, and the law is very limited on that at this time. And there are no private charter schools. Everyone is a public school in Pennsylvania. In other states, that's not correct. And each one is organized as a nonprofit, though many of them then turn over all their revenues to a management company who actually operates the school. But in terms of the legal structure, they're all public nonprofit entities, even though with some of the cyber schools especially, there's complete opacity. They say we write one check a month to the management company, and the management company will not release to the public, like our records are open for public inspection. They say, no, we're a private company, our records are not open for public inspection. It does reduce the public's ability to have any kind of accountability or review. Okay, any other questions or comments? All right, thank you. Next we come to personnel. If there's no objection, I'll take items A through G together.
So moved. Second.
Any discussion on those items? Mrs. Allen, will you please call the roll?
Mr. Ballard?
Aye.
Ms. Allen?
Aye.
Mr. Champagne?
Aye.
Ms. Fuller? Dr. Munson?
Aye.
Dr. Bacher?
Aye.
Mr. Donatelli?
Aye.
Ms. Hyde? Mr. Earnshaw?
Aye.
9 ayes.
Motion carries. Next, may I have a motion on item H?
So moved. Second.
Any discussion on the motion?
Question?
Certainly.
Some of the things we discussed last meeting was Act 93. I'm still a little unclear on some of that. Is Act 93 something the state puts through that we have to follow, or is it each school district has their own version of Act 93?
So Act 93 is a law that requires each school district to have a compensation agreement with its administrative employees. Under Pennsylvania law, the administrators are not allowed to bargain collectively or unionize. So this gives them a compensation agreement that has some of the elements of a collective bargaining agreement, but it's not negotiated in the same way. So the Act 93 of whatever year it was is the governing body there. In this case, this is actually a collective bargaining agreement with one of our labor groups that's under a different set of laws, under the labor laws of the Commonwealth. There's a whole web of statutes that kind of intersect and sometimes seem like they overlap. And for abbreviation, people often refer to it by the Act number, but there have been Act 48s in many years, but the Act 48 that we're talking about is Act 48 from a very specific year that applies to educational, continuing education for educators. So, yeah, so it's a shorthand abbreviation that makes it tough sometimes. Okay. Anything else on that? Any other comments or questions on this one? Mrs. Allen, will you please call the roll?
Ms. Fuller? Aye. Dr. Munson?
Aye.
Dr. Bacher?
Aye.
Mr. Donatelli?
Aye.
Ms. Hyde? Mr. Ballard?
Aye.
Ms. Allen?
Aye.
Mr. Champagne?
Aye.
Mr. Earnshaw?
Aye.
9 ayes.
Motion carries. If there's no objection, we'll take business operations as a single motion, including the addendum.
Question on pay, or not a question, I have a statement on it.
Do you want to hold it out for a separate vote?
That's not a vote, it was on A, was just referring to.
But do you want it held for a separate vote, or are you tabling on all 5 of these items as a single vote? We can do it either way.
I'm going to hold out as a single vote.
Okay, so I'll take a motion on item A, please. Bill,
So moved. Second.
Mr. Donatelli, go ahead.
I just wanted to, again, thank Mr. Frank and Mr. McCall for giving Carol and I some education. We didn't get everything we needed, and then therefore I'm still kind of in the need to know zone, so until we can get some more of that information we're looking for, I'm going to vote no again on bills. So thank you. That's all from my-
Any other discussion on the motion? Mrs. Allen, will you please call the roll? This is 7A, the bill list.
Mr. Donatelli?
No.
Ms. Hyde? Mr. Ballard?
Aye.
Ms. Allen?
No.
Mr. Champagne?
Aye.
Ms. Fuller? Aye. Dr. Munson?
Aye.
Dr. Bacher?
Aye.
Mr. Earnshaw?
Aye.
7 ayes, 2 nays.
Motion carries. If there's no objection, we'll take items 7B through E on the addendum together.
So moved.
Second?
Any discussion on the motion? Mrs. Allen, will you please call the roll?
Ms. Allen?
Aye.
Mr. Champagne?
Aye.
Ms. Fuller? Aye. Dr. Munson?
Aye.
Dr. Bacher?
Aye.
Mr. Donatelli?
Aye.
Ms. Hyde? Mr. Ballard?
Aye.
Mr. Earnshaw?
Aye.
9 ayes.
Motion carries. May I have a motion on item A, curriculum, please?
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion on the motion?
Have a question?
Go ahead.
I think in the exhibit there was something in there, and I guess, and again, in the last meeting, we were on a budget hold for conferences, and I guess now that the governor wanted to confirm some Dr. Schiller, that things have changed.
Not really. We still have a budget freeze. And it's something that's fairly typical to be done in certainly districts I've worked in. And basically what you're saying is that, what you're saying to the administration of the district is that most of your expenditures, most of your needs should have been spent or should have been taken care of at this point. What we try to do is limit expenditures towards the end of the year. Now that helps the surplus, that helps the fund balance. And so, no, we're still on freeze. Now, I don't know about this one in particular, but I can tell you that any of the most of the conferences you're seeing that are approved at this point are coming out of grant funds. And if we don't spend that money, we lose it. So that's money from the state, that's money from the title grants are actually from the federal government. Correct. And we have, so it's important. You can't carry it over, you can't use it for anything else. And it's very, quite frankly, it's very difficult to get back. And we have needs. So yes, the conferences you see that are coming through are, almost every one of them are coming out of those grant funds.
Right, because my question was on the first one with Bob Fred responding, why do we need 3 people from the school if they're going to something like that where one person, I think, could go, get educated, and come back and share with other people, but it's not a lot of money, you know, there's grants, but it just seems.
Sure. And you know, I certainly understand your point, but I respectfully disagree. I think that something as important as that, getting an assistant principal, a principal, and the director of student services who's responsible for district-wide safety, very important for 3 people to go. Big district, and one person going and coming back and trying to turnkey that to others. For something of this magnitude, 3 people is minimum. I would have liked those.
If I may comment, often at conferences like this, there are multiple sessions. So by having 3 people there, the information can be covered.
Absolutely.
Any other questions or comments on item A, curriculum? Dr. Munson?
Yeah, I guess I'll just make, I want to say one thing. You know, I have always been impressed since I've been on the board on how low these educational conference costs are. I mean, the benefit to this district of having our personnel go outside the district, see what other people are doing, exchange ideas and so forth, so outweighs the very small price that we're paying for most of these. I mean, every time I get my packet, I go through and, at least 3/4 of the conference costs are being paid for by, funds that don't come directly from our local tax base. And I mean, if anything, I would be encouraging the district to encourage our people to engage more with the outside educational community and so forth through these kinds of conferences, because I think that's the way we keep this district one of the best districts in the region.
Thank you, Dr. Burns. Mr. Champagne?
I echo Dr. Schiller's point on the first conference. I think it'd be short-sighted and foolish to only send one person, as was suggested. In fact, if you think more should be attended, you think it's appropriate given the seriousness of the issue, I would recommend you do so. I don't think we should in any way, given the current climate that we're in and the need for safety of our students, cut.
I like training, but there's also an additional cost of the substitutes that have to come in for many of these people who are out of the classroom at over a year's time, and it's not easy to get subs. So that's another thing that I would look at, to see what that situation is.
Well, you're right, Mrs. Allen. We have to be very careful with substitutes. We have somewhat of a substitute shortage. It's on any given day, we'll have a couple classrooms that we have to kind of pull people from other areas to cover, and that's really all districts have that issue. When it comes to this particular conference, of course, these are administrators, so
yes, that's fine, but
Any other comments on the motion? Mr. Van
Just be curious to know what comes out of it. We won't double bond for us going to school. I know we're at a different time now, but I'm kind of curious if we could find out what, if they have one of the people that are going to that to speak to us, kind of inform us. I wouldn't mind knowing about what they are going in depth with on that situation. If that's possible.
We can give that information, but in somewhat of a limited fashion. I don't want it to sound like we're hiding anything, because we're not. However, if it affects your internal emergency plan, it's not something, frankly, that I want to get up at a board meeting and share with the public that here are some changes we've made with our emergency procedures as a result of the conference. You really want that confidential. You want that truly as an internal operating procedure. I could certainly share some general comments as to what the individuals came back with, but I probably wouldn't want to be very specific.
Any other comments on the motion? Mrs. Allen, will you please call the roll?
Dr. Munson?
Aye.
Dr. Bacher?
Aye.
Mr. Donatello?
Aye.
Ms. Hyde? Mr. Ballard?
Aye.
Ms. Allen?
Aye.
Mr. Champagne?
Aye.
Ms. Fuller? Aye. Mr. Earnshaw?
Aye.
9 ayes.
Motion carries. Next we come to policy. Do we want to take a brief recess first, or do we want to power through it? Power through it, okay, that's what I'm saying. All right, before we take a motion to adopt these policies, why don't we go through Dr. Schilder, any last minute changes that the administration is recommending?
Yes.
And then we can talk about any other input any board members have, and then have a motion on any altered language there.
One small change, calling your attention to policy number 140 on charter schools. Page 3 of 4. And on that page 3, you'll see a number 5. Everybody caught up?
No, I'm still not even on 140.
Okay. Oh, wait.
Number 5.
You there?
3 of 4, no, 1 of 4.
All right, okay. So we're on number 5. And it says the superintendent may request additional information from the applicant if, and it shouldn't say if, I'd rather not be referred to as it. It should be he or she finds the application is incomplete, or if the additional information will assist in his or her determination. So that's the only change we have on any of the policies that came in from board or administration.
Does anyone have any concerns about any other policies, Mr. Ballard?
Well, just about this one, the solicitor reviewed this to make sure there wasn't a quirk in the law that required the board to require the information.
Are there any other policies? Anyone had any last minute wording changes they wanted to suggest on any of them? I'm not going to go through them one by one, because I'm hoping you've gone through them all enough times. I'm not seeing anything, so we have a motion to adopt the policies as outlined. That includes adopting some new policies, retiring some existing board policies, changing the language of many policies, and renumbering the existing policy 138 as 138. May I have a motion on that?
So moved. Second.
Any discussion on the motion? Mrs. Allen, will you please call the roll?
Ms. Hyde? Mr. Ballard?
Aye.
Ms. Allen?
Aye.
Mr. Champagne?
Aye.
Ms. Fuller? Aye. Dr. Munson?
Aye.
Dr. Bacher?
Aye.
Mr. Donatelli?
Aye.
Mr. Earnshaw?
Aye.
9 ayes.
Motion carries. Congratulations, we're through the second section of the 10 sections in our policy.
Bring on the 200.
Okay. Other educational entities, we have a motion on the Carbon Lehigh Intermediate Unit Facilities Plan. Would you like to make that motion?
I will make that motion.
Is there a second?
Second.
Ms. Ford, would you like to say anything about
Well,
this?
it's simply that within the two counties, there are, changing populations, changing facility needs. And so this is a reorganization of classrooms to better accommodate the students.
Any questions or comments about this motion? Mrs. Allen, will you please call the roll?
Mr. Champagne?
Aye.
Ms. Fuller? Aye. Dr. Munson?
Aye.
Dr. Bacher?
Aye.
Mr. Donatelli?
Aye.
Ms. Hyde? Aye. Mr. Ballard?
Aye.
Ms. Allen?
Aye.
Mr. Earnshaw?
Aye.
9 ayes.
Motion carries. Next, we have a motion before us to reappoint our trustee at the Lehigh Carbon Community College, currently Mrs. Ann Thompson, a former member of this board. I think you served, 10 years, 12 years?
Well,
12 years on this board?
No, actually it was 13, because I was appointed before I was elected.
So 13 years on this board. She thought she was retiring, and we pulled her back in to be our representative at L-Tri-C. She has indicated her willingness to continue. I'd like to invite her to make any comments she'd like to make before we have a motion to reappoint, if you have anything you'd like to share with us.
Well, I don't really get to speak with you very often, and in terms of exciting things are happening at the community college, at our last trustees meeting, we recognized a program that was started by our president, Dr. Ann Bieber, and basically she was addressing succession planning. One thing that is really important at the community college to have a backup plan if somebody moves on to another location. And she began a presidential program where people at the community college applied to be part of this group of people. And they met with various people to instruct them so that they have skills that teach them to be better leaders. And the president from NACYAC and from RAC came and spoke to the group, among other people. And this Presidential Leadership Institute, as it's called, is expanding beyond L-Tri-C. NACYAC is going to be involved. Also, RAC is going to be involved, and Luzerne County heard about it, and they're going to be involved. So we're doing exciting things for not only our students, but our staff, so that our staff will be even better trained than they are currently. Thanks.
Thank you. May I have a motion on the reappointment of Mrs. Thompson?
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion on the motion? Ms. Fuller?
I'd just like to thank you, Mrs. Thompson, for your dedication and your continued service to all of our students. Thank you.
Thank you.
Giselle?
I just had a question on some of the responsibilities that you have as a trustee, because I don't know much about it.
Would you like to give us a brief outline?
Well, basically, as a trustee, I get to serve on committees. We absolutely use the committee structure at L-TRI-C, and actually we're just revising the committee structure. So you get to go to the monthly meeting, and given that we use the committee structure very effectively, you get to serve on committees. You get to choose what committees you wish to serve on. I serve on finance and insurance at the moment, and I'm the head of strategic planning. So you have at least 2 meetings a month, and then we do other things, like we do site visits periodically, like you go to the Morgan site, or you go to the Donnelly site. And of course, you have all this reading to do, just like you have all the reading to do. At the moment, I'm on the committee that's helping to choose the new auditing firm. So they're basic meetings that you go to, and then depending on what committees you serve on, then you get to go to other things as well.
So the Board of Trustees operates very similarly to us. They approve all hiring, all terminations, they approve program expansions and changes to the program studies. They approve awarding of, I think they have tenure positions there, do they? So they approve the awarding of tenure. They approve the budget, the annual budget that's then brought for ratification to all the boards. I believe that the college is collectively owned by the, what is it, 13 school districts in Lehigh and Carbon County. So there are 2 models under which a community college can be run in Pennsylvania, either owned by a group of school districts or owned by a county. In this case, it's owned by the school districts, so that's why we have to approve its budget. And I believe there's one member of the Board of Trustees from each who lives in each of the 13 school districts.
And 2 at large.
Right, 2 at large. And they serve as the representatives that do the work of this, similarly to what we do for the work of the school district. Is that fair?
Yes, that's exactly correct. And I guess I could put a plug in terms of when it was originally set up, basically it was on a 1/3 basis. The students would provide a third, the state would provide a third, and the school districts would provide a third.
Of the funding for
it. And at the present, the students do provide a third, the school districts provide 11%. And we didn't ask for an increase. Thank you.
Any other discussion?
Mr. Donatelli has a question.
Just because you said you're on strategic plan, I don't know if this falls underneath, but I understand there was some looks at, this community college was looking at ways of restructuring, possibly doing away with deans and having self-governing educators. I was wondering what the outcome of that was.
Actually, we have restructured, and we do have deans, and in reality, we have more deans. We had a strategic plan that dramatically changed how the community college operated. It used to be that the president totally made all the decisions. It didn't matter what anybody else thought, the president made all the decisions. And now we have a whole series of various groups. There's a hierarchy to these groups. And the president very often, if she has an idea, she puts it down to the various groups and gets their input on it. And if somebody has a great idea, like for instance, this great idea came from someone there, that a student with dual enrollment, you all know what dual enrollment is, it costs $55. If you have an East Bend student who's in a dual enrollment course, which of course transfers to L-TRI-C credit, after they graduate from Emmaus, if they enroll as a student at LTRIC, they will get a $55 credit for each one of the classes that they took here at East Penn. And it doesn't have to be an academic course. It can be a course to get a credential. So another thing, making it better for our students.
It sounds like a more collaborative leadership model.
Yes, yes, exactly, exactly. Our staff, we consider our staff a very, very important, valuable resource.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions or discussion on the motion? Mrs. Thompson, thank you very much for so ably representing us. She is my mother-in-law, but I still will love to send her up there. So, Mrs. Allen, will you please call the roll?
Dr. Bacher.
Aye.
Mr. Donatelli.
Aye.
Ms. Hyde. Mr. Ballard.
Aye.
Ms. Allen.
Aye.
Mr. Champagne.
Aye.
Ms. Fuller. Aye. Dr. Munson.
Aye.
Mr. Earnshaw.
Aye.
9 ayes.
Motion carries. Next, we have the EI Career and Technical Institute. Ms. Hyde.
We recognize the student competition winners and the small cafeteria. It's always great to see them supported by their family, friends, and instructors. I did want to mention, I always forget to, is that LCTI does have clubs that the students can choose to sit on, like DECA, Future Business Leaders of America, or Family, Career, and Community Leaders. I just want to let you know that they're doing fantastic things. Even for the Family, Career, and Community Leaders of America, 3 students qualified to go to a conference in San Diego, California. So that's just one example. For the future health professionals, some of those students are going to Nashville, Tennessee for a conference also. We did receive a donation, a diesel donation from Mack Truck. It was around $100,000, 3 transmissions, 1 engine, and a shell of a cab. So thank you, Mack Truck. We also had received a grant for a new bulldozer that is a GPS, and our bulldozer was a bit outdated because they are looking for students now with it that understand how to use the GPS aspect on the bulldozer. The NACI testing was in progress when we were on March 23rd. 560 seniors are taking that, and once again, just want to put a plug in for Camp LCTI, and if you're interested, grades 5 through 8, and it's right on the main page on the website. The last thing, and the best thing, right, is that the budget passed. Allentown had not voted yet on Wednesday, March 23rd, but with all the other votes, the budget did pass. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Hyde. Any questions or comments from Ms. Hyde's report? Mr. Champagne.
I just want to mention one thing. Following the meeting we had last month, there were a number of new board members that wanted to get an opportunity to tour the Institute while it was in operation. And Dr. Rushton's been so kind as to set up a date, May 9th at 9:30 in the morning for anyone that wants to attend. I'm sure he can accommodate as many as are available. So again, May 9th, 9:30 to 12:30 for a tour of the Institute.
Make sure you wear your walking shoes. Which is quite large.
Yeah, I believe it's the 3rd largest career technical school in, is it the Commonwealth or is it the country? Yeah, if you haven't had the chance to walk through it while the students are there, it's well worth the time. It's a fantastic school with amazing programs. Any other questions or comments from Ms. Hyde's report? Okay, thank you, Ms. Hyde. Carmen, I interview you.
Thank you. We had an interesting presentation about the Catasauqua behavioral continuum, and it's elementary, middle school, and high school children developing pre-vocational skills and social and academic skills. What I really appreciate about CLIU is that every month they make an attempt to either bring us the students themselves and the parents or a video about the programs, and it really is helpful to get a feel for what is going on at the intermediate unit. And dovetailing with our policies, we had a first reading of the 200 series policy on administering medications. And this was a policy change to to allow staff to administer naloxone in an emergency case, in cases of heroin overdose. Typically, the policy says that the staff must have permission to administer medication, but in this case, it's otherwise that in case of an emergency, a life can be saved. And we were given the district student count, and as of 3/01/2016, 482 East Penn students were receiving major and related services. The largest group was an occupational therapy, 320 students. And that concludes my report.
Thank you, Ms. Fuller. Any questions or comments from Ms. Fuller's report? Thank you. Mr. Ballard, legislative.
Well, I don't know what to say to you. I think many of you have heard that the governor allowed the, quote, the budget that was on his desk to become law without being signed by him. But what a lot of people didn't read was the part about that he, along with that, vetoed the fiscal code. Now, if you know how legislators work in both the federal and the state level, there's always two parts to actually getting money to any particular place. One is a statement of appropriation, and the other is a statement of how you actually spend the money. And it's very possible for people trying to garner votes to put in an appropriation but not put any instructions in for spending that appropriation. So they have their cake and eat it too. They can say they appropriated the money, and then they tell the other people that didn't want to spend the money that they didn't spend it because they did it in this other code. Well, that's the fiscal code type of situation for Pennsylvania, and the governor vetoed the fiscal code. And so then he made his own decision as to how the money that had been appropriated was going to be distributed in the budget. And he calls it a restoration formula. And the fiscal code had tried to put out all the new money according to the new basic education subsidy formula that had been developed bipartisan. When the governor vetoed the fiscal code, all of that went out the window, and the governor directed the Pennsylvania Department of Education to try to restore some of the cuts that Governor Corbett had made 4 years previous in the budgets of various schools. And I'm not saying this is good or bad, and I'm not saying that the new formula wouldn't have done much the same thing, but the net result was that a lot more of the money that was in the appropriation went out to school districts like Philadelphia and Pittsburgh than the legislators had intended to occur under this new distribution. That is why that East Penn did not receive as much money as one would have expected from just the appropriations code and previous budgets. So we didn't get as much money as we would have otherwise because we would have qualified for a number of the factors in the new formula about English language learners and special education and some other things that would, and some degree of poverty, including our degree of free and reduced lunch. So if you want to know where the money went, it went to Pittsburgh and Philadelphia. Okay, and there's already threats of lawsuits and et cetera. But remember, this is last year's budget. Okay, they still haven't gotten anything moved on this year's budget, other than the governor's presentation, which was back in February. It has gone absolutely nowhere. And just within the past week, some news organizations got a release of emails between various legislators and in one particular caucus, you can imagine which one this is, talking about what they were going to try to do for next year's budget. And they have all these situations. One legislator is getting some heat for saying that they should eliminate the ability of students to take Walmart degrees. by this is, he was saying, you know, degrees like English, philosophy, a whole bunch of other degrees that he said didn't have jobs. So he was saying, we'll cut the appropriation for these programs. That's one of the things we'll do to balance the budget. There were a number of proposals to flat fund the entire education budget. The reason for this is the current fiscal analysis of the state is that there is a $2 billion structural deficit in the state budget that is not being addressed. And now all three major rating agencies, Standard & Poor's, Moody's, and Fitch, and I believe a couple of others, have now kicked in along with the Independent Fiscal Office, saying that this structural deficit is there, it's real, it's got to be fixed. And the rating agencies are saying, they were saying by the end of March, they were going to contemplate lowering the state bond rating again because the legislature hasn't dealt with this structural deficit. So that's $2 billion out of $30 billion, okay? That's a 5 or 6% number for that budget, minimum. And as I've said before, you cannot, quote, cut the budget across the board because there are a whole lot of things like contractual obligations to employees, although you can try to lower the number of employees, but the ones you have there, you can't cut them off from their intended salary increases. There are payments like to the federal government for Social Security that you can't tell the federal government, we're not going to send you all the money you're owed for Social Security and things like that. And there's a whole bunch of things in the budget. So that means that other places in the budget where you can make some cuts, you have to cut it more than 5 or 6%. Well, remember last year, the structural deficit would have required a 3% across the board cut. Now it's up to 5 or 6%. So there's going to be some real problems coming up with any money for any program in the state of Pennsylvania for this budget. First of all, don't expect any movement at all before April 26th. I believe that's the date of the primary. Forget it. There's going to be no movement at all. Right? So you're not going to know anything probably till well into May about any discussions at all, and I don't think they're going to be pleasant. So I don't have good news on the budget, either last year or this year. I'm sorry. All I can say is don't count on anything because there's a serious problem they've got to fix, and unfortunately, education is one of those areas that they feel is cuttable. So my best estimate right now is flat funding at best. Maybe we can get optimistic, but I don't count the budget being completed by June 30th either under these circumstances because we still have the November elections. And one of the dynamics they talk about is, well, there's a whole bunch of lame duck legislators that between the November election and the middle of December, when they have a 2-week session, might vote for something that they wouldn't otherwise stand up and vote for because they don't have to worry about being reelected. And that might be your only saving grace under this whole period but waiting until November is not going to help anything. There are a lot of school districts right now who are saying, if this happens again, we're shutting down because they physically do not have the ability to borrow. They don't have any funds left. Their fund balances have been depleted. And they started out with more than 0.5%, by the way. And they can't borrow any money. They're in big trouble. But meanwhile, the legislature is contemplating some of the following bills. The Education Committee is looking at House Bill 1640, which permits schools to display the national motto, "In God We Trust," a real important thing that we need to do in the midst of a budget crisis. The House is actually voting on a bill that creates a senior citizen tax reduction volunteer exchange program. What that means is that we can put senior citizens to work to reduce their tax bill. We can have a volunteer corps, so many hours in school gets so much off of your tax bill. That's on the House floor right now. Representative Saylor has a bill in that which requires training for school board members. It's to be developed by PDE in consultation with PSBA and PASBO maybe, who already offer such courses, on instruction and academic programs, personnel, governance, operations, and fiscal management. And what's even better, every school director will have to take it, who's on board at the time, will have to take it next year. Whatever length of course this is, however they decide to give it, it might be cyber, it might be you have to go to places. But every year thereafter, you get continuing training of approximately probably the same amount. So add a few more volunteer hours into your schedule for next year, because if this thing passes, and like I said, it's just in the House right now, you're going to have some additional training to do. However, there was, strangely enough, not a companion bill for training for legislators, especially in budgeting. But, you know, I'm sure that's following on very shortly. There's bills to force us to have an anti-hazing policy, one that provides civil immunity to school bus drivers who administer an EpiPen. There's another nice to do but unfunded mandate, which requires school districts to provide their facilities free of charge to the Pennsylvania Game Commission for the purpose of holding hunter education classes after school. These haven't passed yet, but they're in the pipeline, ready to be voted on, and I'm sure that's going to, you know, be something that's as important as a budget. And there is one that would be nice to be passed in terms of money management for schools. House Bill 805 is out there, which allows school districts to engage in furloughs for economic reasons. That's the only one that makes any sense in the budget cycle. But like I said, it's out there. House Bill 805 is being voted on the Senate floor, and we'll hear some results in the next few days, I expect. But as far as resolving the real problems of the state of Pennsylvania, I hold out no hope. Thank you, Mr. Armstrong.
Thank you, Mr. Ballard. Any questions or comments for Mr. Ballard's report? All right, thank you. Are there any other items to come to the attention of the board this evening? Ms. Allen?
I was fortunate Saturday evening to attend the Lower McFenchy Middle School play, Cinderella, and it was wonderful. So I'd like to thank the principal, the music person who seems to do so much. The orchestra was wonderful. Those students, the singing, everything was just wonderful. So I've seen the high school several times, but never the middle school, but I will be attending in the future. That's great.
Thank you. Anything else? No, we had an executive session prior to this meeting. We discussed negotiations, personnel items, and real estate. Our next board meeting will be 2 weeks from tonight. And I'm going to motion to adjourn.
So moved.
All in favor? Aye.